Hello and welcome to News Click. Today we have with us Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, who has been following the telecom cases, shall I say, for a long time, and is also a litigant in the current Supreme Court case on the telecom scam. Paranjoy, good to have you with us again on the telecom issue.
Thank you, Prabir, for asking me to speak on the subject.
The new issues that have come out, of course, there have been a lot of things which have been said time and again, but the new issues has really been the CAG report, the draft CAG report which has come. What do you think are the major elements which are new to what has been discussed earlier regarding the scam?
I think there are two or three very significant aspects of the draft CAG report which are noteworthy, very significant, I would say. So far, it had been journalists, independent analysts, political people who were alleging that this second generation spectrum scam is huge. The figures that were being bandied about really range from 10,000 crores to 120 to 130,000 crores. But the problem is, when a journalist writes about it in a newspaper or magazine, or an independent expert makes a comment after hedging his or her calculations, it never has the kind of credibility it has when we have here a bunch of government auditors. They are, after all, a wing of the government of India, though it's independent, the Controller and Auditor General of India, and within it they have a division which focuses specialists on the telecommunications. They have come to the view that the total loss to the exchequer on account of undervaluation of second generation licenses, the excess spectrum that was given to existing players, all of it comes to a staggering sum of 140,000 crore rupees. That is 140,000 followed by 7 zeros. Probably imagine the number of schools you could have built, the number of roads, I mean the kilometers of roads, the power plants you could have converted, the drinking water you could have provided, the rural development that could have taken place. I mean, here you talk about a country with a gross domestic product of about, say, 70 lakh crores, and here we're talking about one scam which is 1,40,000 crore. I mean, it's like 1/50th of your GDP, which is a huge sum of money. Yeah.
You know, Paranjoy, what it does in that sense is to provide a stamp of authenticity to the figures that had been talked about earlier. As I think we ourselves have discussed, that the scam dimension could be anything between 70,000 to 130,000 crores, depending on the way you evaluate the loss of money due to the undervaluation of the spectrum. But the two other things that the CAG report seems to have done, one is, of course, it is said if the difference of opinion between the ministries, and in this case there was Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Law and the Telecom Ministry, then it should have gone to the cabinet. Is that
absolutely correct? That's another very important aspect of the CAG report, which has clearly pointed out that the decisions were taken by Mr. Andimuthu Raja, the Union Minister for Communications and Information Technology, by overruling the advice that was not only given by his own department officials, that means senior officials in the Department of Telecommunications, including a former Secretary Telecom, who's also chairman of the Telecom Commission, also a member of finance, but also the advice that was specifically given to him by the Ministry of Law and the Prime Minister's office, not to mention the Ministry of Finance. So this is very significant because though the Central Bureau of Investigation in its first information report attributes the scam to certain unknown persons in the Department of Telecommunications, what the CAG report effectively does, and yes, it's a draft report which has not yet been presented in Parliament, therefore it's not quote unquote official, but it pins responsibility on the individual concerned who was responsible for taking all the decisions pertaining to the undervaluation of second generation spectrum, and that was the minister himself, and it's his signature and under his specific directions that all the decisions were taken. I think that's very significant.
And the fact that it's a violation of the procedures, business procedures fixed, that if there's a difference between the ministries, then it should go to the cabinet.
It should go to the cabinet or an empowered group of ministers. And Mr. Raja not only staunchly opposed it, eventually the government of India, the rest of the government allowed him to get away with it. And he claimed that there was no issue of two ministries differing with each other, that this was an administrative decision and not a policy debate, which I think that
is not really tenable.
Half-truth at best, at worst a lie, I think is slowly but surely going to be nailed.
The third point, I think, on the CAG's draft report, again, which is very important, which had not been brought out earlier, is the fact that 85 of the licenses were issued out of 122 to parties which really did not qualify for the licenses.
Absolutely correct, Praveer. In particular, there were a clutch of companies associated particularly with two groups, Unitech
and Swan.
and Swan. Both of these companies did not have experience in telecommunications. Both of them were essentially real estate groups. Both these groups had an earlier association with Mr. Raja in his previous avatar as Minister for Environment and Forests. And not only that, what is important is there is prima facie evidence to indicate that at the time these companies in the Unitech group and in the Swan group got the licenses, their articles of association, their memorandum of association did not permit such firms to enter the telecom business, and also what are essentially called the capital adequacy norms, which the DOT's own rules and the TRAI's own rules specify that if you are to get into this particular business of providing telephone services or mobile telephone services, you have to meet certain criteria, you have to meet certain financial norms. It seems all these things happened after the licenses were issued, which clearly indicates that there were gross irregularities and downright favoritism, if you like, in the manner in which. And also what's very interesting is the CAG report also specifies the way in which, the times at which these licenses were issued. You know, this very, very questionable first come, first served basis.
That has been brought out earlier by the PNT auditor.
But what was clearly evident was that here were these firms who not only knew when to put in the application, they had with them ready-made bank drafts, each of them running into 1,650 crores, and they were able to submit it together with the supporting documentation within literally no time at all of that small window
within
being
45 minutes, as
That's
what the
correct.
draft report says.
That's
This is a point which was widely known, that obviously those who had to submit bank guarantees within 45 minutes obviously had it already, knew what was happening. So in that sense, it is something which was new. It is not something which is new, but which has been authenticated.
That's correct. With specific times and with specific hard information which has been obtained from the Department of Telecommunications' own records. So there's a huge amount of authenticity and documented evidence which kinds of I think is almost irrefutable, but only the courts will know, and the CBI and the government.
You know, that brings us to the next issue. There are two elements of governance which seem to have completely failed. Of course, one is our cabinet system, because Mr. Raja has time and again said, well, I had told the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister has not publicly said that he disagreed with Mr. Raja, and
implicitly suggesting that they were with him, that the government as a whole were with him.
So obviously the cabinet system of governance either has to take responsibility for the telecom scam of 140,000 crores or 70,000 crores, whichever way you take it, or it has failed. The second failure which comes out, and I think this is perhaps the reason Supreme Court is now intervening, that we had the person, the secretary in Department of Telecom, who was defending the telecom irregularities, if you will, is the person today who is the Chief Vigilance Commissioner. And therefore, that itself is another problem of governance.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this quotation which I read from the history books, Percival Spear, describing Robert Clive as the poacher who becomes a gamekeeper. So it's almost, that's the analogy which to me seems appropriate. Here was a man who was busy defending some highly questionable decisions of a department, and then he comes to preside over one of the important agencies of the government, which is supposed to be an anti-corruption, the apex anti-corruption body as far as the bureaucracy and the public sector is concerned, in a sense presiding over an important aspect of the investigation.
Considering that perhaps this is the most important case before the CBC today, if we really look at it.
Yes, you can argue that this is certainly among the most important, if not the most important.
So the fact that that person who was defending a set of questionable decisions, though himself was not a party to it originally, should be made the gamekeeper, if you will,
and not only that, the Supreme Court's directions that the Central Vigilance Commission, that the head of the Central Vigilance Commission, Central Vigilance Commissioner, should be appointed through a process of consultation involving the leader of the opposition, the Home Minister and the Prime Minister. And in this three-member panel, the leader of the opposition was opposed to the appointment of the CVC, the present CVC, and she, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj of the Bharatiya Janata Party, was overruled by the Prime Minister and the Home Minister. That too, I think, is very significant.
So the argument that Mr. Raja gives, that not only were they in the know, but they are tacitly with him, even if we, obviously accept that the Prime Minister is not the person who benefited from this, obviously. But nevertheless, that political exigencies, if you will, is the one which is keeping Mr. Raja in place.
That's an interesting observation you've made, Prabir. You could argue that one of the reasons why Mr. Raja continues to be a Union Cabinet Minister is on account of the compulsions of coalition politics. You can argue along those lines. I think we are perhaps exaggerating this whole issue of political compulsions and the compulsions of coalition politics. If you just look at the number of members of parliament belonging to the DMK, the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, and you look at the composition of the Tamil Nadu Vidhan Sabha, the assembly, the state legislative assembly, whose term gets over in a few months down the line. There are elections that are scheduled to take place in April of 2011. One could argue that the DMK needs the Congress more in Chennai than the Congress needs the DMK in New Delhi. Therefore, the question is, why is the government continuing to apparently not take any action against Mr. Raja? We keep hearing about that cabinet reshuffle. We keep hearing about Mr. Raja being allegedly, that his own party members, own DMK party members are allegedly upset that his actions have brought a bad name and strained the relationship between the Congress and the DMK. But all of this is largely in the realm of speculation. We have to wait for the so-called cabinet reshuffle to happen. We have to wait to see if the Congress-DMK alliance continues in the run-up to the assembly elections.
The hard fact is that Mr. Raja is being protected by the Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, and Mr. Karunanidhi, the Chief Minister in Chennai. Without this protection, he would not really be able to survive.
Prabir, you are welcome to your interpretation of the facts, and in this case, I will not disagree with you.
Thank you, Paranjoy. It's been a pleasure discussing this with you, and we hope that your case in the Supreme Court will really bear some fruit. Thanks.
Time will tell. Thank you, Prabir, for asking me to come here.